Hello and welcome to Professor Pincushion. In this tutorial, I'm going to be talking about sewing with fringe. You can see some fringe here. So this is about decorating your garment. I'm going to be talking about how to add it to the hemline and then also how to layer fringe. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk briefly about the fringe and putting it on a garment. So fringe can come in different widths and in different colors. So you have a lot of variety there. You'll notice at the top, you have more of a braided section. This is what we're going to be stitching. So we have something to hold on to. And then you have your fringe part, and this just usually hangs loose. Sometimes you can buy fringe and it has a string at the bottom, sort of attaching all these tendrils together. You can usually remove those after you finish stitching everything in. Now with a garment, for the most part, when I'm sewing on fringe, my garment is pretty much complete. I'm not sewing this to my pieces and then sewing seams, because then you're dealing with all this getting stuck in your seams and stuff, and sometimes it could just be a pain in the neck. So sometimes you may do that if you're just adding the fringe to a very small section, but for most of it, I'm doing it at the end. Now the only thing that hasn't been done to this skirt is the hem. So I'm going to show you first on how to attach this fringe just to the bottom of the hemline. We're now looking at the bottom of my hemline. The only thing I've done is I just did a quick overcasting stitch at the raw edge, just because my fabric tends to fray a lot for this. The first thing I'm going to do is decide, what do I want my hemline to be? So how much are you folding up when you're creating your hem? So if you're, let's say for example, I'm doing a hemline that's 1 inch, I'm going to take my skirt to my sewing machine and I'm going to do a basting stitch at that 1 inch mark all the way around my skirt. Your basting stitch is going to be the longest stitch on your machine. You don't have to worry about doing any back stitching, because it's just going to be a temporary stitch that we're using as a guideline for applying our fringe at the hemline. I'm looking at the right side of my garment, still at my hemline. So here's the basting stitch that I just created. I'm going to bring in my fringe and I'm going to place it so the fringe is going towards the top of the skirt and this braided part is going towards the bottom of the skirt. Now this top edge of the braid part should line up with this basting stitch. So I'm going to line that up, and I'm starting at a seam line here. So this is my center back seam line. So I'm just going to start there with this raw edge right at the seam line edge. I'm going to make sure this is lined up with my basting stitch, and then I'm going to pin it into place. You can see I have my fringe pinned all to the bottom of my skirt. Now instead of just having the raw edge of each side just butted up next to each other, I take each end and I fold it up and over just a little bit and then pin it into place and put them next to each other. That way it'll look a little bit more finished on the inside. So once you have everything pinned into place, you're then going to take it to your machine and do a basting stitch just to baste everything into place, and you're going to do that along the top inner edge of the braiding. I flipped my garment, so now we're looking at the wrong side. You can see my basting stitches right here. So I can now flip this over, so now the fringe is sticking down past the skirt and the raw edge is coming up towards the inside of the skirt. So I'm folding right along that basting stitch. So if I was to move this fringe out of the way, you can just see my original green basting stitches right there. They should be right on that fold line. So when this is done and we look at the right side, you're not going to see any of this braided section of the fringe. You're just going to see the main fringe part. Instead of just having this raw edge hanging out right here, what you can do is fold to your basting stitches and then refold it back up. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and pin everything into place. Before you stitch your hem into place, I like to always press my area so then it looks a little bit neater before I go ahead and stitch it. Now I'm looking at the right side again, because when I sew this, I want to look at the right side. That way I can make sure wherever I stitch it, it's going to be even with this bottom edge right here. And also it keeps the fringe a little bit out of the way, a little bit easier. So when you stitch your hem into place, you can really stitch wherever you want, but you do need to make sure you're catching the braid on the other side, and whatever you folded the raw edge over, you're also catching that. So I'm going to do mine about 1/4 inch away from the edge of this white part. I'm just stitching a regular stitch going on the 1/4 inch mark, and I'm making sure that my fringe is not getting stitched under. You want to keep that out of the way as you sew. Once your hem is finished, if you have any basting stitches showing, you can go ahead and remove those. Next, we're going to be moving on to layering the fringe if you want to create something like a flapper dress. So to do that, the first thing, I mean, it's very similar to what we've already been doing. You're going to look at the right side of the garment because now we're going to start pinning everything to the right side. And you just need to determine how much you want to layer one row with the other. So this part is the bottom of this edge, and that's what we're going to measure. So you can either have a lot of it overlapping or you can have a little bit. It's really up to you. I kind of like mine just a little bit like this. The more you overlap, the more rows you're going to have to do. So I'm going to measure this. It's about 1 inch. And so every time I do a new row, I'm going to do them 1 inch apart, measuring from the bottom edge of the braiding. So I'm going to use my fabric marker, and I'm actually going to mark on my skirt the 1 inch mark. That's going to give me my guideline so I know where to pin my next set of fringe. Here's my mark right here that I'm going to use as my guideline. I'm going to bring my fringe in. You're going to take the end, you're going to turn it under just a little bit, about 1/8 of an inch. And I'm going to start right at my seam line. So again, I'm starting at the center back line because that's where I have my zipper, and you're never going to overlap your fringe over your zipper. So you're going to start at your zipper and end at your zipper. Or if you don't have that, you just have a regular seam, that's where you're going to start and stop. So the bottom gets lined up on my mark. I'm going to pin it, and then I'm going to go all the way around. And once I bring my fringe all the way back over here, you're going to fold under again, and you're going to butt those edges right up against each other. Then I like to do a basting stitch, and I'm going to do this right along here. So that's just going to hold things in, and then over your basting stitch, you can then do a regular stitch. At this point, I've done a few layers. So I'm basting and stitching right down the middle of that braiding section. And when I'm sewing this, I'm only doing 1 layer at a time. So I'm sewing this down or basting and then sewing, and then I'm going ahead and doing the next layer instead of doing all my layers, pinning them together and trying to sew them all together. That'll be a lot easier so you don't have all your fringe getting in the way as you're stitching. Also, you can do as many layers as you want. You don't have to go to the top of your skirt if you don't wish to. Like I have about 4 layers here, so I could stop there if I wish. If I don't really like seeing the band out like this, you can always go ahead and layer ribbon over the top of it and stitch that, or you can glue rhinestones on. It's really up to you and how much you want to embellish it. New tutorials are released weekly, so please subscribe to be notified at the next release. Make sure to check out our other videos and visit ProfessorPincushion.com to view our complete library with well over 200 sewing video tutorials, including our exclusive premium content. Our premium membership is only $5 a month for unlimited access and only available at ProfessorPincushion.com. Also, don't forget to download our mobile app for videos on the go. Thanks for watching.